Hello, everybody. Um, Thank you for doing my second episode on divorce as a human right. In this situation, we're dealing with objections to divorce as a human right. I've titled it "Objections to Divorce" because it would be rather long to do that. So basically, for people who don't know, my background is a little bit. I didn't put it properly, but that's the UN flag. United Nations flag. Basically, I do have a view, of course, that divorce is a human right. However, there are very good objections to it. What I'm going to do is to address the objection first, and then the counter objection, why I think it's not good enough. That doesn't mean that that objection itself is bad. People come to different conclusions on this issue, and that's totally fine. I'm not here to convince people and try and say, okay, if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong, but rather to have a discussion in the comments. Although this is the monologue, you can discuss and say, Chindy, I think you're wrong on this issue. It is possible that I can change my mind in the future. However, I've looked at this issue very carefully over a number of years, and I think I can tell you why I think divorce is a human right, and the objections don't suffice in convincing me. But they are great objections, and I will get into them. Let's get into them right now. Let's go. Hello. So the first objection that you we have to look at is basically the idea that children are negatively affected by divorce. Okay. So, this idea that children who are innocent, who did not choose to come into this world, are very negatively affected by divorce. Now, I have a screen to share of the ideas I came up with, which I got from other people who commented on my issue about my divorce and criticized my first episode, which was on the idea that divorce is a human right. So I will cite those objections in this number one objection. There will be other subsequent objections, but let's start with this first one. And let me go on and see what and share this screen with you. I'm just going to share one moment. All right, so I've just shared a screen with you of what my ideas came up. It's my Microsoft Word. Don't worry about it. It's a little bit crude. I don't like the chalkboard, so I just use Microsoft Word or Excel to get my ideas across of what I'm trying to say. And in that way, you can read it as you follow through. It makes it easy to understand, especially if you're one of those people who really supports my position. And I'm trying to do steel man, the other position, so that we avoid straw manning. So steel manning is where you try to objectively look at the ideas of your opponent. Straw manning is where you try to ridicule or belittle what your opponent is saying. So let's go here and talk about why people say divorce is a bad idea for children and therefore it should be restricted and no fault divorce should definitely not be allowed. It goes like this. Of course, it starts with divorce is bad for children. When families split, it negatively affects children. This is true. Okay. When families split up, it really affects children because children have to consistently move environments from one to another. Think about visitations. It gets really complicated, right? So if they split visitations, maybe the children have to stay over the summer with the father and all the other time with the mother, let's say, that can affect um, the ability of children to adapt properly to an environment. So if you're consistently changing environments, as one person who's changed environments, it's very tense. It's very uncomfortable. It's not easy, and it doesn't help the children. But also, and I'm talking in terms of people who are wealthy enough to do that. Let's take situations where parents are permanently divided. Maybe one person has sole custody and they prevent one parent from seeing the children. That has a negative impact. It's been shown that statistically, children in two-parent households have much on average. Okay, this is average. Please, people don't quote me and say, oh, this person did better than. I'm talking about averages. Okay, on average, children who come from a two-parent family home do better than people who come from a single family, a single parent family home. I forgot to put parent here, single parent family home. And so if you look at it, I say it here. Basically, the idea is that the state must protect the family as much as possible because it's good for children to have a unit of a couple rather than one person raising the children. So the state must do everything in their power to protect the children. And one way to do so is to restrict divorce or to make divorce harder to do. So to basically remove no fault divorce. People should not be able to divorce because they want to. Okay, you should state a reason why you want to divorce, and you should show proof. So it should be maybe unfaithfulness or something like that. So that's what they are saying. They are basically saying, look, this affects children negatively, and that affects society in a negative way. If if children go through what would call juvenile delinquency, okay? So if children come from divorced families, have a higher juvenile delinquency, right? It means that the higher the divorce rate, the higher the juvenile delinquency. And that means there'll be, in the future, higher crime rate, right? There's this idea that actually people who come from single family homes, there's a higher chance that those children, when they grow into adults, end up becoming criminals, okay? I'm not saying, again, let me be clear here. I am not saying that every child or majority, no, I'm just saying that statistically, when you compare the two, this is what they're saying. This is what the position of those who are saying that divorce should be restricted are saying. They're saying, look, it affects family in a very bad way, in a very negative way. And very good examples people will give is example of the welfare system and how it encourages poorer families to have to not have a father in the household, especially. Usually it's mothers, okay? Sometimes it could be a father, but usually it's mothers. So an example is a mother who is trying to get public assistance. If it's discovered that she has another parent in the household whose income is considered, then that parent can lose the support. So that's a problem as well. So they say, wait a second, we need to do more to encourage two-parent family houses, to encourage people to stay together, and we need to restrict divorce and avoid people going into no-fault divorce, divorcing for no reason at all. And that's the idea behind it. Now, the major question I would have for this objection is one question I have is co-parenting can do just as good of a job, right? So maybe we should encourage parents to co-parent. They don't have to stay married together. The other thing is, if people want to split up, there are other ways to split up. Just because people are married They don't have to live together. A lot of people work in separate towns. Sometimes they're married, but they live in separate cities and separate addresses, especially people who are middle class and wealthy people. They can do these things. So, telling people that they can't divorce is not going to stop children growing up in one family household. It just means that it makes it actually much more harder for people to divorce, and that's it, as a legal paper. I don't think it would necessarily solve the problem of the issues that children are going to face with their parents. Because if people want to split up, they want to split up. If two parents say, I want to split up, I'm out. I can't be forced against it. If I'm married and I say I'm out of this house, I'm going to go find my own partner. I don't think my wife can stop me if I was married. I'm not married, but if I was, my wife can stop me from going to another place if I don't want to. So even if there's no marriage, there'll still be separations. I don't see the difference between separations and divorces in terms of the effect of children. So people need to tell me that. And the other thing they need to deal with is toxic relationships. If the family is toxic, and toxic relationships don't necessarily involve adultery or lack of faith or even physical abuse. It could be just, mental and psychological abuse, which is much more difficult to measure. And so these things can be very bad for children. If people are always arguing and screaming at each other and fighting each other all the time, that will have a negative impact on children, and they might have been better off divorced. In worse case scenarios, you could see a situation in which even some people are considering murder illegal. Yeah, you can capture the person, but then the children have lost both parents. I'll give an example. There was a recent case that is involved that happened in Utah. I'm not going to mention the names. You're free to Google it. In Utah, where a mother of three children murdered her husband. Okay, murdered her husband. Okay, she put poison. Now they come from a very conservative background. He was actually a Mormon, and he went to and that sort of thing. He was killed by his wife. He was poisoned by his wife. I mean, at least it's alleged. Let's me use the word allegedly poisoned because it's not yet proven, but it's allegedly poisoned. I mean, it's been proved. The evidence, such evidence, is overwhelming, and it looks like he'll be most likely found guilty. And I have to ask myself this question: how did this happen? Well, it happened because this man, who's a very nice father, a very good father, and may he rest in peace, decided and said, you know what? I'm going to stay in this marriage. This marriage is not working out. It looks like she's going to kill me. He suspected she was going to kill. He kind of had that inkling that she was going to kill. And he said, you know what? I'm staying in this marriage for the children. And guess what happened? Despite him staying in the marriage for the children, he ended up dead. He was killed by his, you know, by his wife. He was poisoned. And his wife has been captured, so the children have lost both parents. Now, this is a worst case scenario. It rarely happens. But guess what? When you're forcing people to stay together, these things can become much more frequent. Okay? If you can't get rid of them, people will find other ways to get rid of people, to make life miserable. And so I like the idea of divorce. I agree that divorce is bad for children. I wouldn't disagree with that. But where I disagree is that therefore we should remove divorce as a right or reduce it as a human right. I disagree with that. I think there's a reason why things like no fault divorce should be allowed. And it's the reason is because if people don't get along, they don't get along. And trying to force them to get along is just going to have an intended consequence and make matters worse. So we'll go on to the next point, which I will be pointing out very, very soon.